This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by Content Marketing World, the world's premier content marketing event. Find out more at contentmarketingworld.com today. Use the offer code BeanCast. And by Rev, fast, accurate transcription delivered in less than 12 hours. Find out more and get $10 off your first order at rev.com/blog/BeanCast. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Visit them on the web at recursivesquirrel.com. Episode 545, Digital Hellscape. Monday, June 3rd, 2019. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. Experience marketing is hot right now. From activations to events to in-store service, branding has embraced the real-world experience gospel. But with an ever more connected consumer, is digital still a critical factor in all experience? Tonight, we'll discuss. Also, will the duopoly soon be a triopoly? Standardizing influencer marketing? Whether cabs are your next programmatic buy? Plus the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the man without whom we wouldn't have podcasting at all. Yes, he's the man who actually spec'd out, I love saying this, it's a geek thing, Tristan, you gotta allow me to do it. He's the man who spec'd out enclosures, and I always get like total geek cred whenever I put him on. The president and CEO of Casebook, Mr. Tristan Louis. Tristan, welcome.
Happy to give you some geek cred, and great to be here.
There's not many ways that I can get geek cred anymore, and this is one of the best ways. I got to always call that out. Now, also with us, we have the editor-in-chief at the Clio Awards, Mr. Tim Nudd. That's another cred. That's an ad cred, though. How you doing, Tim?
Doing well, Bob. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. Now, next, she's the Vice President of Strategy and Creative Services at NewsCred, Miss Lieu Pham. Lil, hi.
Hey, Bob. You're doing well with the news, the cred theme.
I was thinking about that as I was saying. I was wondering if you're going to call me out on that. And finally, we're excited to have back the Chief Marketing Officer of W2O Group. Mr. Aaron Strout is here. Hi, Aaron.
Hey, Bob. It's great to be back.
Well, we've got a lot to cover, and first up on the docket is this thing about digital and real-world experience marketing. You know, as is often the case when I prepare for the show, I found what is essentially a self-serving article that nonetheless put me on the trail of some bigger thinking about the role of digital when planning for real-world marketing experience. Now, the article, which was obviously written by a digital marketing executive, so I'm making no bones about it being that, suggests that digital and mobile are so much a part of most every real-life experience now that it has become essential to always include a digital hook when planning for in-person encounters. Now, Lil, first, do you agree with this premise in part or in full? And then, either way, does this line of thinking significantly impact planning, in your opinion? What are your thoughts on this premise?
I think there's definitely an expectation that most in-person experiences will feature some kind of digital follow-up or digital element. But whether it's essential, well, I think that's a more difficult question to answer. I think it's less a question of whether digital and mobile should be mandatory and more a question of how you leverage it. Okay, so for example, what's the purpose? Does it actually serve to improve the customer experience? And if it doesn't, absolutely. And I think we can all, offer examples of great sort of retail or in-person experiences partnering or combining with digital elements. For example, Nike, it's a brand that does this really well. some of their flagship stores are built with that digital shopping experience in mind, and combines the best of both worlds. You can do your shopping, and I think you can do your shopping without even having to interact with anyone in the store. But if you want that face-to-face interaction, it's also available. So I like that there's actually a choice. I think your second question was about planning.
Yeah, the idea about does this significantly impact planning, whether or not it's a essential thing or whether or not it's something that comes up occasionally. Should we always at least be considering it in the planning phase of the operation or the experience?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that first of all, you should be thinking about delivering an omni-channel approach. So that's about making sure that customer journey and all the channels, whether that's online or offline as a whole, is actually working together, and not treating them as separate entities. So if you are planning for an experience like that, and considering both considering both digital and in-person experiences, then you need to make sure that they work and they fit together. But ultimately, you should be thinking about the narrative or the story that you're trying to come up with, and then choosing the right channel and the right tactics to actually make that work for you.
One of the things that's been said and bandied around in the marketing circles for quite some time is be mobile first. And Tim, I mean, I know that with your experience both at Adweek and then at the Clios, you're constantly being confronted by agencies delivering work that is mobile first. Does that apply in this circumstance as well? That, of course you're going to have some kind of mobile digital component with anything else you're doing, because we're supposed to be designing from a mobile first perspective. Is that a rational approach, or are you kind of seeing there's examples of maybe something that's not always doing that?
Well, I think it depends on what you're trying to do, and if you're talking about retail, that kind of in-person encounter, for sure, I think you need to build out some kind of digital mobile experience. I mean, there's lots of different ways to do it. The way that you phrased the question, or the way that the article that you're referencing sort of put it, was that you need a digital hook. It's essential to have a digital hook. Well, it's not essential at all to have a digital hook. You can have an in-person encounter that's completely free of digital, and in fact, people are craving that, I think, more and more, especially when it comes to experiential. I mean, the classic example that I was thinking of when I heard about this was, what HBO did at South by Southwest a couple of years ago when they built out the Westworld thing. And the whole idea was to have it be non-tech. And I spoke to Stephen Cardwell, actually, who's the head of experiential over at HBO, and he was like, the most high-tech thing we had was the DVD player on the bus that took people to the event.
Yeah,
So
but even with that, though, they depended upon social media to amplify the story, and they depended upon the photographs that were generated from the experience. So, I mean, it's not exactly fair to say that they didn't have a digital component planned for in the experience, because they totally had a digital component.
Well, sure, but not for the people that were there is what I mean.
But isn't the idea, though, that those actually and I'm using air quotes here, non-digital experiences are really driven because there are so many digital experiences, and therefore creating a pseudo non-digital experience is in itself a different signal that you're sending to the market, but that still needs to be amplified in digital medium in order to really drive the message across.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense for sure, but I do think that there's an element of if you're checking a box, if the digital hook is not sort of central to the DNA of the piece or of the plan, then what are you doing? You're sort of, I think in the end that it depends on what the goal is. If you're a Nike and you have a wonderful in-person experience where you build a sneaker around something that the consumer has designed, then that's wonderful. But I think just, if you have an event where you're just collecting data, it can be clunky. It doesn't really add anything to the experience.
I agree with you, Tim. I think there's a genuine desire to cut back on digital time and focus more on sort of, face-to-face interactions. And you think of this in terms of the cultural trends that are happening, the advent of organic food, natural wine, and even vinyls. People want more of a return to analog. And I'm not saying that they are doing away with digital. I don't think anyone would want that. It's just about trying to not use digital as a crutch. And I think to your earlier point, you can have an in-person event as the main event, and you can't help if people amplify the event through social. It's just part of their day-to-day habits, but it's not the main event. It's not the main DNA, as you put it.
Something that strikes me about this is that when we're talking about things like getting back to nature, and we're talking about getting back to a non-digital type of experience or an analog experience, often a lot of these movements are driven by online conversation. So, I mean, yeah, you're feeling guilty about being so digital. Yes, you want to become more analog, but it's still digital driving the trend. And it's
I would posit, Bob, that two things are happening. One is that there's been so many abuses by some of the larger social actors, or so many concerns around abuses, that there's a counterbalance in the pendulum in the way people are thinking about it, where technology used to be good, and now anything in technology is considered evil, and so that's moving the pendulum in the other direction. The other part is that the reality is everything is digital, right? We actually now have digital trackers on pretty much everyone in the population, and therefore we can get attribution, not necessarily very well, but we're trying to get attribution on every individual and every interaction in every type of medium. And so digital, to call digital marketing something different is really now kind of beyond the point, because to me, it seems that every form of marketing has some digital component.
Yeah, and I think that's at the heart of what this argument's saying. Although, really the argument is all about getting more digital business for the agency or whatever. But still, I mean, it does come out that this is something that we're living with. I mean, Aaron, what's your take on all this? I mean, this fits, right in with what you're doing every day.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm going to draw upon an article that I wrote for Marketing Land a few years ago, which was starting with that premise of everyone talks about mobile first, which I think you do want to think about, although I would argue you also need to think about who your audience is, right? Most people do have a mobile device now, but if you're targeting a 75-year-old versus a 17-year-old, you obviously might want to think through different considerations. And I think you really want to make sure that it is, I think Lil said this, is it a good experience, right? Do they tie together? Are you doing things that, make sense? I remember I railed on QR codes for a long time because while they've now become a little bit more pragmatic, or a lot of times, like you go to a restaurant, you'd scan in a QR code and it would take you to the menu that you probably were seeing the QR code on. And it's like, why did you just make me jump through those hoops, right? So I think we're in a day where there's so much that you can do, but it's taking that master UX, UI experience and saying, what's going to be the best experience for my target audience? What tools do I have available? Like, is this a natural place for them to be using their phone or iPad or laptop? And, or can I just keep it simple? I think Tim mentioned, sometimes it's like, if I just want to have a face-to-face interaction and it's easy for me to do that, spending 10 minutes fumbling through an app versus just saying, hey, can I order a hamburger? That's really where you want to go. So I think it's that whole Occam's razor principle of sometimes the best idea or the best approach is the most simple.
I give you a lot of cred for bringing up something that I really wanted the conversation to get to, which is, sometimes people are not digitally savvy or not digitally aware or not digitally driven. If you're talking to 75-year-olds, chances are you're not talking to somebody who is essentially grown up with digital. You're talking to somebody who's maybe adopted or maybe hasn't adopted it much. There are always circumstances where digital is not necessary. And one of the things that comes to mind is this situation of digital overuse. And if we're constantly inserting digital into the campaigns, aren't we part of the problem? Tristan, what's your take on that? I mean, it's just like, is it essential to put digital in Well, let me rephrase that. Is digital sometimes part of the problem, and that we need to cut digital out in order to make a better communication or a more effective communication in a world that's overstimulated with digital?
I think what we need to do is that we really need to think about what digital means, because to a large extent, digital doesn't really mean much of anything. I mean, we've got thousands of people that are listening to the BeanCast right now. They're using digital means to listen to the BeanCast, but does that make the BeanCast digital? I don't know. If you're watching something on Hulu and an ad shows up on something on YouTube, does that make that ad digital? Some people would argue yes, some people would argue against it. Does the simple fact that you get attribution on a type of experience in the physical world make that experience digital? It all is a question of what you decide to define as digital. If digital is a distribution network, then yes, you're probably right. It doesn't necessarily make sense to always have digital. But if digital is digital attribution, then it doesn't make sense to not have it in any situation.
What about the negative impact, though? I mean, there are some pragmatic situations that would say don't use digital in this circumstance. But you also have the situation like in New York where they're thinking about legislating the fact that crossing the street crossing at a corner while you're looking at your phone can be something that you can be fined for. And I'm wondering, in those circumstances, I mean, not that you're going to be doing a lot of digital things in those types of circumstances, crossing a street per se, but when you have a situation where there's actively legal things going on or negative opinion about using digital in that circumstance, there's some real reasons to avoid it, aren't there?
I agree. I think as a society, we are now starting to realize the kind of weaponized digital that we've put in the hands of users and the addictive nature that we've created around a lot of those tools. There's going to be some kind of controls around it. I think that horse has long left the stable at this point. The one thing that worries me, though, is that there is going to be over-regulation now, because we are in a part of the cycle of adoption that is looking at a counterbalance to what has existed in the past. And therefore, the freewheeling 90s and early 2000s years of anything goes in digital are behind us. And now there is a much more cynical type of approach to what is digital, and therefore increased calls and increased belief that regulating this stuff is better for everyone. The truth is that it's somewhere in the middle.
I think there's just a fundamental issue with adding a digital layer to an experience, unless that layer has real utility, it's just more of the noise that we're already getting too much of. I think, we're all on Instagram too much. We're all on Twitter too much. And if marketers are just going to say, hey, be in this device more, I think that just usually would get in the way. I can count. I mean, the experiences that I've been to, the branded experiences, very rarely is the digital layer like super exciting or the core of the idea. It's just an add-on usually. And I think, of course, it's hard to get away from engaging in those platforms, and marketers spend tons of money and all this effort to build those audiences, and those are the people they're trying to reach. So
I think you just hit on something really important, though, which is that we're still building digital as an add-on. We're not building digital as something that's integrated, and we haven't seen really anyone, or we've seen very few people use digital in a way that is truly innovative and that is truly digital native in those types of integrated experiences.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's not easy to do that. And I think, Bob, when you say mobile first, I mean, how many years are we into like mobile's the next big thing? I mean, we're still not doing it, are we? We're still sort of translating traditional campaigns for digital, and it's mostly noise.
That's okay. I mean, it's just like there was an agency that will go unnamed that was called me in at one point to help their staff get a little bit more digital by talking about digital use cases, and I'm like, wow, this is like 2018, 2017 or something like that when I did this. I'm thinking this is many years into the experience, and yet still people are struggling with the question of how to be digital enough, let alone mobile. There were a few people jumping in. Lil, did you have something more?
Yeah, I was going to bring it back to that point earlier when you were saying that some people aren't digitally savvy, and some of these digital elements fail to meet that need. And I think it's not about them. It's more about that digital element not being a good user experience. So, for example, if it's too complicated for them to use, then obviously there's a problem with the digital or the technology element. There's that popular saying that tech changes, but people don't. And technology really has to build on existing behaviors.
Well, we're going to move on and talk next. So you have one more thing you wanted to say?
The last thing I wanted to say, I was in Nashville recently. I went to Third Man Records, Jack White's label. And this is a company that is completely devoted to creating real things and pushing back against the virtual stuff in the world. Like virtual technology has taken over the music industry. So much has been lost. And it was super inspiring just to see that stuff and to feel like the pushback against, because virtual, digital, mobile things, they're not real. They exist in this space that's not tactile, that's not, like when you go to a concert, it almost feels beside the point to be Instagramming, because the experience that you're having is so visceral and real. And I think brands, they want to get into turn everything into a digital experience, and I think it pales in comparison to a real world experience. And I think that's the biggest issue.
And that's a good place to wrap it up. But I wanted to move on and talk next about the fact that Amazon might soon be part of the duopoly, making it a triopoly with the purchase of Seismic, purchase of Seismic's ad platform and the fire sale that's going on over there. But we'll get to that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk to you about your planning for fall conferences. You've been probably thinking about it, and if you haven't, you're wasting your time, because you need to start thinking about what fall conferences you're going to attend. And if you're an agency person, I want you to make one event your top priority. You got to think about Content Marketing World this year. So many of my past guests are speakers there. You'd be crazy to pass this up, not just because they're speakers, but because they're actually speakers who give you great information that's useful. I mean, people like Tamsin Webster. I mean, Tamsin is going to be keynoting this year. She's one of the main keynoters, and you've heard her many times on this show. She's fantastic, and she's going to be the main stage keynote at the event. Ann Handley, who wrote Content Rules. Lee Odin, who always offers lots of information about content and about search engine optimization and search engine marketing. They're all going to be there. Nearly every major brand globally is also going to be there, and they're expecting over 4,000 attendees. So this is not some fly-by-night little conference. This is one of the biggest events out there. I think it's time for agency folks to discover it as well, because agency folks have been missing out on this. Content Marketing World is the world's original and largest annual gathering of content marketing professionals, all coming to hear the latest thinking on every topic imaginable about content marketing. For instance, let's go back to Lee Odin. Lee is by far one of the most informative speakers I've heard or have ever had the pleasure of hearing. I sat through a session once with him, and by 15 minutes in, my head was swimming with all the practical and applicable advice he offered. It was just amazing how deep he got in such a limited amount of time, and how much useful information he offered. And he's just one of the many speakers who are going to be there. And the best part for my agency listeners out there is CM World is rolling out lots of great networking and learning opportunities that are specifically focused on you. I mean, they've got that whole agency track of sessions to explore, but they also have a branded content track, and they even have an agency-exclusive cocktail hour. So when they're rolling out the free drinks for you, you know that you're important and that they're taking you seriously. And plus, this is something you can't underestimate, there's literally hundreds of new business prospects roaming the convention hall. I mean, you've got 4,000 people there. You've got all the major brands showing up. you're undoubtedly going to run into somebody that you've wanted to be in the same room with for some time in order to get them as a client for your agency. This is the perfect place to do that. There really isn't any good excuse for you not to send at least one member of your staff. And really, if you get honest with yourself, there's no reason you shouldn't be going. Now, September 3rd through the 6th are the dates, and Cleveland, Ohio is where it's happening. So don't wait. Register today at contentmarketingworld.com. Use the offer code BeanCast, all caps. You got to use all caps to make it work. I don't understand why, but that's the way it is. Use it all caps, and they'll even knock off $100 off when you use that code. That website again is contentmarketingworld.com, offer code BeanCast. Register today, and I'll be looking for you at this year's event. Well, Amazon is the big winner of the Seismic ad serving platform acquired through the asset sale from the bankrupt company. And while Seismic itself couldn't make the platform compete against the duopoly, they tried, and they tried really hard. In the hands of Amazon's folks, let's get back to this. In the hands of Amazon, they're already heralding the rise of a true competitor in the formation of a triopoly as a result of them having this increased technology for their ad serving. So Tristan, how does this acquisition change the playing field? Or does it? Does it even change the playing field? What's your take on this move?
So I think it does change the playing field. I agree with you that it moves from a duopoly to a triopoly, but for a number of reasons. I mean, Amazon had obvious ambitions against the DSP market in particular, and so we knew that they were going to do something, and now they're doing it on the cheap. The DSP DMP market portion of Seismic's business went for about $36 million. So this can't have been a very expensive way for them to get both advertising technology and know-how. So that's a first piece. The second part is around boosting their trove of data. Amazon is a very data hungry type of company. They have both digital data through their online stores and AWS, and then some physical data now through their increased offline presence with Whole Foods and with other acquisitions in the offline world. And so those components are really becoming key to becoming a third competitor. But that said, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work out, right? There's been two similar type of acquisitions that work as a model here. One is the acquisition of DoubleClick by Google in 2007, which made Google one of the prominent partner in this particular space. The other one was the acquisition of Atlas by Facebook, and that doesn't seem to have panned out quite as well for Facebook in terms of the overall integration.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the marketplace is littered with all kinds of situations where an acquisition has failed, where that should have been something fantastic, Atlas being one of them. But that's not the case with Amazon. Amazon's not Facebook. I mean, Amazon is clearly set up to take advantage of this platform a lot better than even Facebook was, because Facebook... Go ahead.
Yes, it is. And actually, one of the most interesting thing to me in this particular model was the idea that Amazon has been talking about driving more interactive ads into display, and basically with this acquisition they're going to end up getting paid for driving traffic back towards Amazon by brands that are already selling products on Amazon.
Lil, what's your take on this? And specifically, I'm asking in terms of ad buyers. Is this good for ad buyers, or is this bad for ad buyers? Are you ambivalent? I mean, what's your take on this situation with Amazon kind of entering the market full bore, actually becoming an equal player in the battle between Facebook and Google?
Well, it's not my area of expertise, Bob, but it's clearly a marriage between Amazon's data and ability to target consumers outside its platform, right? So kind of that combination of the ability to get consumers to its website through ads that marketers buy and place outside its platform is pretty lucrative and pretty appealing. But I think I read somewhere that it might take a while for them to integrate into their system. And I think that's really the challenge for them to making this work.
Yeah, to give you a sense, I think DoubleClick took about 4 years, and Atlas is now going on year 7 or 8 in terms of that integration, and it's still not complete.
Didn't I hear? Go ahead, Aaron.
Can I just chime in? This is Aaron.
Yeah,
I think the thing to think about here is, and I worked at Fidelity Investments for 9 years, and so we got really good at looking at what people did based on sort of buying behavior or the investing behavior. And the advantage that I think Amazon does have here is, on Facebook, what everyone talks about. On Google, what everyone's searching for. On Amazon, what they actually buy, right? And you have a huge population to look at that. And I think, as Tristan mentioned up front, you have the physical and the digital. So yes, it is definitely a risk in terms of you never know how an acquisition is going to go and the integration piece, especially when it's bringing complex technology together. But if I'm a betting man, I would say the one that knows the buying behavior of, probably 3/4 of the people in this country and a lot of people throughout the world, that is a very powerful tool. And this is a company that came out of the gate, 15, 20 years ago, with its collaborative filtering technology. If you bought this, you might like this, which was a relatively rudimentary technology at the time, but was much smarter than anything else that was out there. So I think that, with that type of data that they have and the smarts they have and the knowledge that they have, I just can't see them not killing it in this marketplace.
Yeah, let's say, I want to get your opinion, Aaron, on the value of each of those three things. We have intent through Google, we have social graph or sentiment through Facebook, if you want to call it that, and then we have buying or past purchasing or POS data when we come with Amazon. Which is more important, or are all of them equally important? And it's just you got to add that third component into your marketing buy in order to understand the consumer completely.
Well, they're all important. The thing is they work on different parts of the funnel, right? I would argue that your social graphics or the behavior is at the top, the search intent is in the middle, but it's until they actually close the deal that you don't know what they really do. And this is the age-old, who did you vote for in the presidential election? Or, what are you going to buy? I could theoretically be buying 1,000 things in the next week, but knowing what I actually bought, that's where it's really powerful. And then knowing in combination, what else did I buy? When did I buy it? And those are the things where you can start to do really deep data, mining in terms of knowing people, knowing where they are, the regions, what are the impacts. And so, again, they are all important. I'm not minimizing that. And certainly, Facebook has the benefit of I'm not sitting on Amazon all day, sort of thumbing through things where I might be with Facebook, right? And Google, it's the thing I start all of my searches with. So, they kind of know how people think. But I have found that it's that purchase behavior is critical because you can actually predict what people are going to do with a certainty that you can't with those other two.
So, Aaron, I'm actually going to challenge some of your thinking there around Google being the place that you start searches on, because in a lot of cases, actually, when it comes to buying something, an increasing number of consumers are starting that search on Amazon. That's become kind of the default, and that's where this particular purchase and Amazon's ambition in the advertising space are kind of interesting, because Amazon is dead set on owning that transactional part of the overall transaction. And I think that they've been undermining search not only in the web channel by having more consumers going directly to their stuff, but on mobile by providing more mobile capabilities within their own app. And in the audio space now with things like the Amazon Echo, distributing a wider ecosystem than what Google can do, and undermining Google as the ecosystem when it comes to the next generation of the internet.
Yeah, I actually agree with you. And I'd forgotten about the Alexa piece. And then also thinking about their streaming content. So now, while it's more passive, on the streaming side, they know a lot more of your sort of, content behaviors. And then with Alexa, they listen to everything we say. So they know a hell of a lot more about us than, actually the other two. Google obviously is playing hard in this space too, but that is a big deal.
Yeah, and actually on the streaming piece, there's an intriguing component, right? Because Sysmex does have some video ad insertion technology, and you could see Amazon essentially introducing a version of Prime Video that is ad supported on top of the existing content.
Great.
Well, I want to move on and talk a little bit about influencer marketing. Apparently, an industry group has been formed to look at standardizing influencer marketing across the spectrum. We'll be getting into that in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about a sponsor who is near and dear to my heart. I got so excited when I found out that Rev was going to be a sponsor on my show, because Rev is the very first transcription service I ever used in this business. We're talking about years and years before I started this show even. I was relying on Rev for fast, quality transcription. And when they told me that they were interested in advertising on the program, I'm like, deal, we're done. We're going to get you on the program because I love you guys. Now, having a good quality transcription service is not just a luxury. It's a necessity these days. I mean, think about it. More and more, we are relying on audio recordings so that we don't miss anything. I mean, everything from focus group recordings to using your smartphone to record a conference keynote to podcasting even. And Rev is your ticket in all those situations about making all that valuable data accessible and, even more importantly, searchable. All in less than 12 hours. Now, I don't know about you or your transcription service, but 24 hours is pretty darn good. It's one of the best in the business as far as I'm concerned, and they get it fast and they get it accurate. Look, whether you have a transcription service already or you've never used one, all they're asking you to do is give them a try. Let them put their service head-to-head against whatever service you're considering or using. So right now, I want you to go to rev.com/blog/BeanCast, and they're going to give you $10 off your first order just so you can see whether or not this is truly the best in the transcription service business. I want you to see for yourself what Rev's speed and accuracy can do for you. That's rev.com/blog/BeanCast for a $10 discount. Try them today, and we thank them very much for their support of our program. Well, as I was mentioning about influencer marketing, an industry coalition that includes both top-tier agencies and major brands has formed a working group to establish standards and best practices for working with influencers. My question, Tim, is do we really think this effort will have any meaningful impact in the end? I mean, we hear about these working groups all the time, and we just don't see a whole lot of movement in actual practice. So what's your take on this?
Well, that's true. I mean, this one's called the Influencer Marketing Council. So they're called IMC. And speaking of slow moving, I believe they actually formed in 2017. They've just been hanging around, not doing a whole lot. And I think the news recently was that they just released some guidelines. Obviously the FTC already has guidelines, mostly around, compliance for certain hashtags, things like that. So, the other thing is they're quite small. I mean, they do have Clorox, I think, is one of the brands. They've got 7 agencies. They've got an analytics platform that seems to be kind of running the show, actually. So you kind of have to wonder what the goal is. And from what I can tell, it's where the FTC is looking for disclosure, the IMC is really looking to combat fraud primarily right now. So they're trying to, the FTC is protecting the consumer, IMC is protecting the brand, essentially seems to be the dichotomy. And fraud is, it's been a huge problem in all kinds of digital marketing, as we know, for many, many years. I read a stat that I think 11% of engagement for influencer-sponsored posts on Instagram is fraudulent, is basically bots. And so, it's interesting to have this a group of agencies plus a platform plus some brands sort of look into combating fraud like this. They've put out some guidelines. There's 12 guidelines. And they're all pretty much, best practices on how to identify fraudulent activity. Things like looking at the history of an influencer's account. Checking for stuff like weird spikes in followers or weird engagement or even like weird comments that would suggest bot activity. So, I mean, I think it's starting small. It's interesting that they put this out. I think they're going to need many, many more agencies and brands to jump on board. Otherwise, I think it's not going to have too much of a splash. I think they do want to do more than prevent fraud. They're talking a little bit about trying to sort of band together to determine things like value and pricing, which could be interesting. That stuff's all over the map as well with influencers. So they might even be able to appeal to influencers themselves to join certain brands if they have a set of standards that they all adhere to. So I guess it's,
for me,
hopefully they won't take 2 years to do the next interesting thing.
For me, that was the major question, whether or not this body or these guidelines or standards that are trying to be implemented, whether or not they would have any bite in terms of the actual influencers. Because really, it comes down to what they're trying to do is enforce good behavior, and they're trying to get the influencers to be compliant with the agency and the brand standards. They can say all they want that we're trying to look and make good recommendations on what to look out for in terms of fraud and how to standardize the pricing models, etc. But without buy-in from the influencers themselves, really this group is just talking to the wind, because they really need to be bringing this into compliance, right?
I was glad to see that this is happening, because it hasn't happened in 2004. It hasn't happened in 2007, hasn't happened in 2009. I could keep going on. I mean, there's been a number of efforts back in the early 2000s around blogging influencers, and then moving on through the different social media platforms as they went on, to now the broader influencer marketing market. And it seems that unless you get broad support from many of the larger actors in the ecosystem, those kinds of policies are essentially doomed to fail.
And it doesn't have to be voluntary compliance either. It really just needs to be a hit to revenue because they're not in compliance. It's more about because all these brands and all these agencies have banded together and are enforcing these policies within their internal buying units. That's what's gonna force the average influencer to go, I got to clean up my act and I've got to be in compliance, or else I'm not going to make the money. That's where this really needs to work. It's not about enforcing good behavior on behalf of the brands, and that brings up another question: should it be actually looking more closely at what the industry is doing wrong, as opposed to what the influencers are doing wrong, because that's what it's essentially doing. It's essentially trying to look at fraud, and it's trying to standardize the way that the things that we expect when we're buying time on an influencer's channel. Is that not right, Tim? I mean,
yeah, no, I think that's right, and I think right now you have Clorox on board, you've got StubHub, and you have the furniture company, I believe Hayworth. I mean, it's an extremely small group, and you wonder where the P&Gs of the world are, and the Unilevers, and I think it's probably very difficult. Each of these companies has their own ecosystem and feels maybe confident on their own doing this, but I think developing an initiative around this would be wonderful, and I think there is certain on the brand side there needs to be some work done there too. I mean, the influencers aren't going to police themselves, right? They're going to just try to get as much money as they can for every deal. So, yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I think the fact that they've been around for a while and haven't done a whole lot doesn't bode that well for this group.
Lil, anything that you can add to this? I mean, do you feel good about the fact that the industry is at least looking at the issue? Do you have any hopes that it's going to bring about any standards that could be actually applicable and helpful to you in your efforts?
Well, I think that the key word here is like best practices versus compliance, right? I think best practices are always a suggestion. And I think for us to really move the needle here, there need to be consequences and legal consequences. So it's one thing to make the rules, but another to enforce it. And I think that there's also that larger issue at hand, which is what is really causing this. Is the system broken? And we're not going to convince celebrities and influencers to do away with it because they're making a living from this and it's quite lucrative for them, and to persuade them to do otherwise is going to be very difficult. So I mean, to answer your question, I have hope, but there needs to be a lot of work done. And I think Tristan mentioned, getting buy-in and making sure that everyone is aware of the issue and why we're doing it needs to also be addressed before actually going into the don't do it kind of, trajectory.
I actually want to call back to the previous story around Sysmic and Amazon. Before announcing the acquisition, Amazon actually went around to each of the agencies that Sysmic is dealing with and checked with them as to whether they would be okay with Amazon acquiring Sysmic. And so in the same way, has a group like this gone around to some of the larger influencers and figured out how to make them players in that overall ecosystem?
Oh, what a great idea.
Semi-regulation.
Yeah, what a great idea. I mean, to not just keep them in the cold, in the dark, looking in on this industry group that's telling them how they should do their business, but actively working with them a little bit and trying to figure out what they would want or what they would need in order to better be partners with the agencies, be better partners with the brands. That's such a great idea and something that they didn't look at, or at least doesn't seem like they looked at. Well, I got to move on to our final topic of the night. Digital cab signage company Firefly has made a big splash in New York, effectively creating a programmatic network out of their cab top displays. If you've never been to New York, what happens on the top of every cab is there's a sign. It's usually a light-up sign, but has been increasingly becoming digital signs. So the network will allow advertisers to target neighborhoods, time periods, and even individuals with dynamically inserted ads, according to the Firefly press release and all the things going on about this. So Aaron, why and how is this important to advertisers? I mean, are you excited about this move by Firefly? And give us some examples about maybe how you would use it if you are. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so this ties in well to something I was passionate about earlier days, right? So I wrote the Dummies book on location-based marketing. This was back in 2011, way too early, by the way. But the idea was really better understanding not only the who, but the where and the when. And this, in my mind, is starting to take, and one of the issues with location-based marketing is it was so reliant on your mobile phone. And a lot of people didn't necessarily want to open your app when they were walking into a Macy's and say, oh, let me open up Macy's and see what videos are going to pop up or whatever. So I think from a connecting the dots in an experiential perspective, this can be powerful. Particularly, what I liked the most about this article and what Firefly is doing is the idea of thinking about the location and times, so the bars, they talked about finance as one of the sectors, right? So knowing where people, who work at Citi or Chase or whatever are, so driving around their neighborhood, where do they go for drinks? Maybe what public transportation do they take home? So if you can have a coordinated programmatic messaging campaign, then I think you can actually start to go hard after them, right? And whether that's for better men's health, whether it's for, maybe it's a new promotion they're putting out or a particular movie or a book or whatever, I think it is a way to do it. Now, the issue a little bit is scale. New York, obviously, this works well. I think other cities, probably like Boston, Boston, San Francisco, maybe LA, but we also know there are these things called Uber and Lyft who are getting in on the game, by the way. And so I think that could be a piece that's also pretty powerful. And there's one thing they didn't mention in the article that I've heard a bit about that hasn't come to be yet, but there's a movement to create digital license plates. And the idea would be is you'd see essentially a virtual license plate when someone was driving, but when they came to a stop, if you wanted to, you could buy into this network and you could actually show ads on your license plate. So think about now, not just 3,300 or 3,600 cabs in New York, plus all the Ubers and Lyfts, but think about literally every single car and anywhere you are, whether you're walking, driving, or whatever, being able to have that experience. That to me is when that really could be powerful. But back to the original premise, I love the idea of being really targeted by time, location, down to the neighborhood level. And I think if they do it right, they really could have struck gold here.
I think what you're describing, though, is a digital advertising hellscape where there is no piece
I was just going to say that.
no piece of visible media that doesn't have some kind of ad on it.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing.
They're already on top of the cabs, though.
Right.
So-
well,
They're on top, yeah, but they're not yet on the
on the license plate. Yeah.
Yeah, but I
So
think
assume that the drivers will get a piece of the pie, right?
yeah, I
When
mean,
they
you would
do that,
opt in. You would
and they
opt into it.
become essentially the owners of advertising spaces, can make some additional income on the side. That's great.
You know, it's just like giving you a fair shake, though, giving Aaron a fair shake on this idea about the license plates. Not everywhere is New York. Not everywhere is San Francisco or Boston. You know, it's just like there are plenty of places across this country where there aren't cab tops to advertise, and giving them the opportunity to access ad space in traffic via these different license plate screens of whatever they're going to be. I'm not really sure I understand this completely, but I mean, there's plenty of use cases to fill in the gaps that aren't available to a New York audience. Because in New York, you're right, Tristan, it would be like a complete hellscape of messaging overload that nothing would be seen, and with so many ads being displayed constantly every time you came to a red light. That would be horrible. But if you're going to, say, Richmond, Virginia at rush hour, it's a whole different story. It's something that might actually be useful or helpful.
Well, I think if you take it from the brand side too, Bob, you know, we get really good at being banner blind or sort of advertising blind. Like, how often, if you're reading a newspaper or a magazine, do you actually look at the ads? Probably not very much, right? Or even on your mobile phone, you don't see them much. So what are the ways that you can disrupt? And particularly if you can be programmatic about it, it's the slightly annoying thing, but I know with conferences, you were mentioning one earlier as part of your promo, Bob, but there's one in particular who I won't mention that I've gone to their site once or twice, and they follow me around everywhere, and everyone's had this happen, I know. But there is an element to, it does remind me of like, oh yeah, I do need to sign up to do that like I wanted to. And so it could be a hellscape, but if it's done tastefully, you also could have a nice campaign series, and it could be, I'm going to tell you a story, and I'm going to sort of disrupt you in a manner that is thoughtful and tasteful versus something that's like poking your eyes out all the time. So I think given how difficult it is to insert yourself, there's no more TV really, right? There's no more, there are fewer and fewer places where you can regularly get people's attention. It could be a way, at least for, 2 years, 5 years, to start to really be more interruptive. We don't like it as consumers per se, but from a brand perspective, it's a new frontier.
Well, I would also add the thing that struck me about this is that there's actually pretty interesting creative possibilities around being able to location target taxi cab tops. You could think of a lot of different fun ways that this could be employed. And right now, I mean, the static or the stuff that's not location based is pretty invisible. And it's just, we think about the delivery of the ads in a story like this, but I think from a creative point of view, people could do some interesting stuff with this, and I think that might be interesting.
One good example of that is actually, I think it is Delta that's running ads around going to Newark Airport versus going to JFK and the difference in travel times between the two based on where the cab is actually sitting at the time. And so it's, for some reason, it always looks favorable in terms of their side of the business. But it's an interesting experiment in terms of actually using location data, weather data, traffic data to create a different type of ad impression.
Mm-hmm.
Well, with that, it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug, starting with Tristan Louis. You can find him at casebook.net. That's the home of his startup where he is president and CEO. Tell us what's going on in your world, Tristan. What would you like to promote?
Well, my world is not a world of marketing, so it is actually about as far from marketing as you can get because I sell software to government agencies.
But selling,
what
marketing. You're selling.
But what I want to do in terms of promotion is that I actually want to use this time to remind listeners that of the great value that they get out of the BeanCast, and to remind them that there are probably 2 or 3 people that they know that are not listening to the BeanCast right now. And so I would like to ask them this week to reach out to those 2 or 3 people and tell them about all the great content that they get from Bob.
Thank you so much for saying that. And it's just, I think the audience probably thinks that I pay these people to come on the show and say that, but all the constant recommendations during this time when people have a chance to promote themselves are true and honest. I never ask for this. So thank you so much, Tristan, for saying that. Now, next up, we have Tim Nudd. You can find him at Clios.com. You know how to spell Clios. You're all agency people. So tell us what's going on in your world, Tim. What would you like to promote?
Well, I love you as well, Bob, and I love the BeanCast, but I'm going to promote my own site.
You should.
For those who haven't visited, I run a site for Clios called Muse. It's available at musebyclio.com, and it's a content site. It's editorial. It's completely independent from the Clio award shows. We write about creativity in advertising and beyond, and this year is particularly exciting because it's the 60th anniversary of the Clios this year. We're doing really interesting and fun content around that. We're running a bunch of essays from some legends in the business telling us their favorite story of advertising, their time in the business. So check it out at Muse.
Yeah, definitely check that out, because it's just and sorry for not getting that website in. You should have. I'm glad that you mentioned it, because it's just, something that I actually looked for. I knew you did Muse and wanted to get that in there. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
It's a good site. Next up, Lieu Pham. You can find her at newscred.com. Link will be in the show notes. But tell us, what's going on in your world? What would you like to promote, Lieu?
Oh, Bob, I was going to plug you as well. I was going to say, listen to the BeanCast every Monday with Bob North. So I guess Tristan has actually bet me to the punch. Okay, so I guess I'll promote something that I'm doing, which is a free webinar that I'm doing on June the 18th. And it's on the topic of integrated campaign best practices. So for those who don't know NewsCred, we're an enterprise software company that helps marketing organizations plan, collaborate, and create campaigns and content at scale. So join me on June the 18th. And you can Google integrated campaigns, best practices, NewsCred, and you'll get that webinar landing page.
Oh, fantastic. And you really should take the opportunity to meet Lil. She's like an amazing individual and one of the best people to sit down and just talk with. And so if you can get her aside and get a conversation going, really great brain on that one. All right. Last but not least, we have Aaron Strout. You can find him at w2ogroup.com. That's where he's the chief marketing officer. Tell us what's going on in your world, Aaron. What would you like to promote?
Well, because of the fact that, TV shows is not necessarily competition, I do a podcast on behalf of W2O called the What to Know podcast. And it reminds me that I probably need to get you on the show at some point. This is my 4th series, but we have it on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. We also have it at the W2ogroup.com, where we also have lots of great content. And so we just got out of ASCO, which is one of the biggest oncology conferences in the country. Lots of good content coming out of there. So check those out.
Oh, yeah, fantastic. And of course, anything to do with podcasting, we float all boats. So glad that you're doing it. And for those of you who don't know Aaron, he's done a number of podcasts over the years. He's an old veteran in this space. So we definitely recommend anything he's doing there. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. And of course, you can find out how to even advertise on the program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And now it's time for the good, the bad, and the ugly, a rundown of the best and worst of advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. And first up, the good. Publicis Spain executed a phenomenal idea for client IKEA. I love this thing. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, guys, but hopefully you did. Only using IKEA furniture and with no textual reference at all to tell people what they were doing, they recreated iconic living room sets from some of TV's most beloved shows. I mean, Tim, some of these things were amazing. Without any kind of reference that this was the Simpsons living room, they did it with a completely using IKEA furniture, and you knew it was the living room. It was amazing.
Yeah, instantly recognizable. It was the Simpsons living room, I think Monica's living room from Friends, and the Stranger Things living room as well. This was actually our most read story of the week over on Muse, and it's really, really wonderful. Although I should point out that it's not original. There's a brand out there called Modsy, which is an interior design service that for about a year now they've been doing almost the exact same thing, like shoppable versions of famous rooms from TV shows. However, the IKEA stuff was way better executed, and so execution matters, even if the idea is kind of warmed over.
Of course, yeah. It's just like this. It's not the first time people have played around with the idea of IKEA rooms. And one of my favorites, although infamous, an old Tumblr blog showed you found an IKEA found in porn, I think it was, and it was basically like an IKEA commercial referencing any kind of furniture that was used in a porno. It was like terrible
Nice.
thing, but it was hysterically funny. Well, let's move on to the bad. Not that wasn't bad enough. Tom Webster, you know Tom from the show. He's over at Edison, where he is the VP of strategy. And he shared a billboard he found at an airport that attempted to showcase Nielsen data, claiming 75% of people who learned about a destination through airport signage ended up visiting that destination. Sounds like a great thing for an airport to advertise. Unfortunately, the designer of the ad represented 75% with a pie chart that actually showed 90%, or probably about 90%, and even misspelled Nielsen. Aaron, this one just got me. I looked at this and I just broke down laughing because it was so ludicrous that they would think that pie chart said it was 75%.
Well, and the good news is it's not like many people see it going through an airport, because we know there's only, several 100,000 people that go through an airport every day. So, yeah, that's about as bad as it gets. And then to misspell the name of Nielsen, who I think probably all of us could spell that backward in our sleep.
Maybe they did spell it backwards. How would we know?
That's true.
Now, moving on to the ugly, and this is truly ugly. The North Face, let's say that again, the North Face, the clothing maker, in partnership with their Brazilian agency, Leo Burnett Taylor, found an imaginative way to raise their ranking in Google search. They simply replaced the images found in Wikipedia articles for high-traffic destinations with product shots taken at these destinations. It worked brilliantly, Lil, until the agency started crowing about how smart they were about doing this, resulting in a massive backlash against their client. This got some really ugly remarks about how it was the same as if they had gone into the national parks and actually spray painted on billboards. I mean, people were really angry about this, and probably nobody would have even recognized the fact that they had done it if they hadn't have bragged about it.
Right, and where was their legal team? Like, when brand trust is such a major issue, I am so astounded that it even got past their legal team, if they even checked it with their legal team.
Yeah, it's got to be flying by the seat of your pants stuff. But we expect that from some agencies looking for their fake awards. If they're looking for fake awards, they're obviously not playing too close to the legal side of the business. We'll just have to let them go on this one. Well, anyway, have a suggestion for this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag GBU. That's pound GBU. Well, that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an Apple Podcast listener, we've also provided a direct link to our listing there, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory on the Apple Podcasts app. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
it's like, you know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.